5 losses they had in terms of runs they've given up. You had a 19-0 to Michigan, 16-0 to Wofford.
Yeah.
Gonzaga 16-5. You kind of expected that in that kind of setting. How does Carolina negate that? Is it just as simple as, so to some degree you give credit to the other team, but then at some point you got to blame yourself. Like, man, we're not doing a good enough job here.
Well, I know one of the big things that people were really frustrated with coming out of the locker room was the fact that they went back to Kenny Smith instead of keeping, KJ. I always call him Kenny. Instead of going back to Jeremiah Francis, who had, been driving your offense so far in that first half, came in, looked as good as he did the other night. And to a certain extent, I get that. I mean, here's the thing. You guys have to remember this. I mean, look, Jeremiah Francis played 28 minutes in this game today. I think that's probably around the max that you're going to see him. He might get to 30 in a game this year, but you got to remember, he is still injured. So you're going to have moments where you put KJ Smith on the floor. But yeah, I don't know if there really is a simple solution because it's one of those stretches, and we've seen it throughout other parts of games. But it seems like every time that they come out of the locker room to start the second half, those turnover issues, those bad entry passes, the failure to move without the basketball, all that stuff starts to rear its ugly head at the start of that second half. And then all of a sudden, like you saw here, Carolina, has that moment, whether it's, one of the TV timeouts or if Roy Williams has to call a timeout, and all of a sudden they get it back on track and everything starts to pick back up. I think today the biggest thing for Carolina was the moment that Anthony Harris came in, the whole game changed. That was the biggest thing. But, yeah, I think they're, at some point, I don't know what's going on. It's not the fact that the coaching staff doesn't have the guys ready. I mean, I don't understand what you can do to have guys ready coming out of halftime because the team was doing, they've been doing fine at the end of halves. I mean, that's the other most confusing thing to me. Really, even in all of the losses, Carolina has usually closed the first half pretty well to keep the game in reach and give you a chance. They did it against Ohio State. They did it in the game against Virginia, and they did it against Gonzaga. But every time that they come out of the locker room, I don't know what happens, but for some reason, there is always some sort of run. Today it was 14-0 to start the second half. And Carolina was just lucky they had a big enough lead in this one. But it's at some point, when you're looking at games later on down the line against Virginia again, against Duke, against Louisville, you're not going to be able to keep letting that happen, or else it's really this simple. You're not going to win those games. That's not going to happen. So Carolina, that's one thing that they've got to get figured out. But, I mean, look, this team fought back, and once they let up that big run, fought back with a run of their own, pulled away today against UCLA. So, I mean, it's hard to really be overly angry about it, but it's still something that for some reason seems to be a trend, and you'd like to see this team sort of get figured out here as they head into ACC play.
Yeah, and look, for all the fans that want to gripe and complain, Roy Williams called a timeout today. So he called that timeout.
2?
Well, no, the one he didn't call, it was called by a player. But he called a timeout in the middle of the run and was extremely animated in the huddle, trying to implore his guys.
Right.
And I think a problem with today's game was the lack of energy in that building. I get it because you had a 7-4 UCLA and a 6-5 Carolina. There was nobody there, and it's really hard for a guy or a players to get motivated when you know you're going into an arena that's going to lack energy. When you were in the Bahamas, you didn't lack the arena had energy. When you played in Carmichael, Spokane, there was energy in that building that maybe a run, like something. If this 12-0 run for UCLA was in, Westwood or in a different venue with energy, it could have really changed the game. But it wasn't like anything else was able to affect it. But it's something that Carolina's going to have to iron out before ACC play because they're not good enough to withstand those kind of runs night in, night out. Last thing. I mentioned this earlier, and look, KJ Smith is, he is what he is. He's starting, and maybe just because of he knows the system a little bit better. At some point, either Jeremiah Francis or Anthony Harris are going to be the starting point guard, you have to imagine. I think you can play both of them together, and as Roy Williams tries to iron out that rotation, I'm comfortable with until, Cole Anthony comes back, rolling with Francis, Harris, and then, of course, you can switch one or the other when Anthony comes back. Robinson, Brooks, and Baycott, and bring in Leaky off the bench. What are your thoughts?
I mean, you pick who you want on the floor out of B-Rob and Leaky. I mean, both guys, again today, struggled with their shot selection. I would probably say B-Rob with you just because he can knock down the outside shot. No, when you say that they could play together, you're wrong. They should play together. That was the best lineup that Carolina had on the floor all day.
The next time you tell me you're wrong,
guys.
you are fired.
You are dead ass wrong.
And you're fired.
So there you go. Yes, both guys should be on the floor together because that was when the offense looked its best. You got two guys that are really just seeing the floor about as good as anybody is right now. And I know that Jeremiah Francis just 1 of 8 today. But still, I mean, he had a couple of shots that, as we talked about, were pretty much down and out. And then Anthony Harris, I mean, he's been one of those guys, we said it as kind of like a joke when he first came back. Oh, maybe he'll come back and actually provide some decent shooting. I mean, it can't get much worse. He's actually shot the ball pretty well so far in his limited minutes. But I think the biggest thing is, and why KJ Smith is still playing right now as the starter, why we see him start games, it's got to be the health, right? Like, both of these guys are still fighting through injuries, probably playing a little bit earlier than maybe they should be, just because Carolina they don't have the luxury of letting those guys sit out and get fully healthy right now. They need them on the floor. So I think that could be part of the reason why. But, I mean, look, just look at the plus-minus of these guys today. I mean, you look at Jeremiah Francis plus 15, Anthony Harris plus 15, KJ Smith minus 8 while on the floor. I mean, look, I know that KJ's out there playing as hard as he can, and that's fine, but it's okay to admit that the talent level between the three, Harris and Francis definitely hold a bigger advantage over KJ. So, yeah, I think eventually you're going to have to see those guys in there. And, yeah, when Cole returns, I mean, it's interesting. There was someone on social media that was saying, would you like to see Cole at the 2? I think, honestly, right now, with the way that Cole was playing before he exited the lineup with the injury, I think he would be better as the 2 guard with Francis or Harris in there bringing the ball up. Just from what I've seen, I think that would probably give you your best lineup on the floor. The other thing is you got to think with both of those guys on the floor, I mean, it's interchangeable. I mean, just because you're saying, okay, well, technically Jeremiah is playing the 1, that doesn't mean that occasionally if you want to, Cole can't bring the ball up. You can have both guys bring the ball up. But I think, just from looking at what he was doing towards the end, where he was sort of settling for those outside shots and really wasn't able to drive the basket the way that we thought he would be able to, I think he might succeed out of that 4 spot.
Yeah, I don't
2 spot.
I don't know if I agree with that because he's not like Roy Williams did that when he had Joel Berry and Marcus Page, but I'm taking Page's ability to shoot the ball and drive the rim over Cole Anthony's at this point, and when you were having that discussion. I think if you're going to start Cole Anthony, your 2 guard is going to be Anthony Harris because I trust his shot making a little bit better. And Francis is the guy that you come in that runs the second unit. And I think you could still enjoy a lot of success with that. But look, that's all speculation.
Right.
Roy Williams hasn't even hinted at any lineup changes that we know of. We kind of thought if we'd get one, and we may get it today. Maybe we get it when we come back and we play Yale. They get 9 days. Anthony or Jeremiah Francis probably has to pass a conditioning test. Probably same with Anthony Harris before they're even allowed to start. So just some fun speculations and something to have, especially after you get to talk about a victory, which we haven't had to do since the battle for Atlanta. So that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Roy's Boys podcast. I want to thank Anthony for taking some time to come on here and talk a little Carolina basketball, as it's finally a joyous occasion. Do want to encourage you guys, check out the HeelToughBlog.com. We'll have all the things post-UCLA, my recap, Anthony's analysis on there. Also, football-wise, we're starting to get you ready for Temple that will kick off next Friday at noon from Annapolis. Anthony's got scouting reports on from state championship games. Shrine Bowl stuff's going to be up there. So even though it's Christmas, it's still a busy time for us over on the HeelToughBlog.com. Do want to encourage you guys to like and subscribe to the podcast anywhere you find your podcast: Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Give us a like, give us a review. We'll greatly appreciate that one. Thank you guys for listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.